And right after Davos, the next weekend, I will travel to India. There's still work to do, but we are on the cusp of a historic trade agreement. Indeed, some call it the mother of all deals. One that would create a market of 2 billion people, accounting for almost a quarter of global GDP. And crucially, that would provide a first mover advantage for Europe with one of the world's fastest growing and most dynamic continents.
We have adopted a new EU-India strategy. India is a crucial partner for the European Union. The EU and India together account for 25% of the global population and GDP. India also is the world's largest democracy and its fastest growing economy. Closer European Union-India relations are vital for strengthening economic security and diversifying supply chains.
Europe just made its second major trade move in weeks, and it quietly rewrites the global power map. In all, the world is shifting in ways most people don't see yet. While the United States debates tariffs, walls, and election cycles, the rest of the world is quietly rewriting the rules of global power. And this week, the European Union made its boldest move in decades. A trade agreement so large, so sweeping, and so strategically timed that it signals something deeper. The world is moving on. The EU and India have finalized what both sides are calling the mother of all trade deals, a free trade agreement 20 years in the making. A deal that creates a market covering a quarter of the world's GDP, 1/3 of global trade, and nearly 2 billion people. This isn't a minor tariff tweak. This is a structural shift in the global economy. Tariffs removed or reduced on more than 90% of goods traded between the two. European cars, machinery, pharmaceuticals, and chemicals gaining massive access to India. Indian textiles, leather, jewelry, pharmaceuticals, smartphones, engineering goods, and polished diamonds gaining near total access to Europe. 99% of Indian exports will receive duty-free access to the EU market, and the EU predicts it will double its exports to India by 2032. This is not just economics. This is geopolitics. This is Europe planting a flag in Asia and doing it without the United States. For Europe, this deal is about survival in a world defined by US-China rivalry. It's about diversifying supply chains, securing energy, and reducing dependence on unpredictable partners. Europe watched the US pull out of major trade agreements. It watched tariffs hit allies and rivals alike. It watched global supply chains collapse during the pandemic. It watched the world become more volatile, more fragmented, more unpredictable. And so Europe made a choice: stop waiting for America and start building its own world. But this wasn't Europe's only move. Just weeks earlier, the EU finalized the Mercosur agreement with Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, and Uruguay, a market of 700 million people, billions in tariff savings. A bridge between Europe and South America, a deal that took over 20 years to negotiate. A deal that ties Europe to the world's largest agricultural bloc and some of the fastest growing consumer markets on the planet. But Mercosur came with resistance, especially from European farmers worried about competition and environmental standards. The India deal avoided those landmines. It's cleaner, bigger, and more strategic. Together, these two deals form a new economic architecture stretching from Lisbon to Mumbai, from Berlin to Buenos Aires, a world where Europe is no longer a passive player. It's a builder of blocks, and the timing is not accidental. Europe sees a world where the old certainties are fading. The United States is no longer the predictable anchor it once was. China is rising but increasingly contested. Russia is isolated. The global south is asserting itself. And Europe, squeezed between great powers dependent on foreign energy and vulnerable to supply chain shocks, is trying to carve out a new identity, a power that can stand on its own. The EU-India deal is also deeply technical. It tackles some of the toughest regulatory barriers in the world. The EU's regulatory system, from food standards to chemical safety to digital rules, is one of the strictest on Earth. Indian exporters have long struggled with the compliance burden, but this deal gives India a legal pathway to navigate those rules, modernize its export sectors, and gain predictable access to the European market. It's not just about tariffs. It's about regulatory certainty in a world where global trade is becoming more protectionist. And then there's the auto sector, one of the most contentious chapters in the entire negotiation. European car makers have been pushing for lower import duties for years. India has been cautious, protecting its fast-growing domestic car industry. The final compromise is a mix of quotas, phased tariff reductions, and transition periods. It's a delicate balance. Europe gets access, India gets time. This is how modern trade deals are built, not through brute force but through careful engineering. So what does Europe gain from these deals? Industrial dominance. Cars, machinery, chemicals, and pharmaceuticals, Europe's strongest sectors now enter India with drastically lower tariffs. Supply chain security. Europe reduces dependence on China and the US by building new trade corridors. Strategic autonomy. Europe is no longer waiting for Washington to lead. It's creating its own alliances. Geopolitical leverage. By partnering with India, the world's largest democracy, Europe strengthens its position in Asia without choosing sides in the US-China rivalry. And perhaps most importantly, Europe gains relevance in a world where relevance is no longer guaranteed. But here's the twist. This deal didn't happen despite America. It happened because of America. Economists say President Trump's tariff policies pushed India and Europe closer together. India's labor-intensive exports, textiles, leather, gems were hit hard by US tariffs. Europe became the alternative. Europe needed new markets after US trade tensions. India needed relief from US pressure. So they turned to each other. Trump's worldview is transactional. Zero sum. If Europe and India build a massive trade bloc without the U.S., it can be seen as a challenge to American leverage. Not illegal, not hostile, but unmistakably strategic. While Washington raised walls, Brussels built bridges. And now Europe is shaping the next world order, one deal at a time. This raises a bigger question. Is America being left behind? Not isolated, but less central. The world is becoming multipolar. Europe is signing deals with India, Mercosur, Africa, and ASEAN. China is expanding Belt and Road. India is rising as a manufacturing hub. The Gulf states are diversifying. Africa is forming its own continental free trade zone. The U.S. is no longer the gravitational center of global trade, not because it was pushed out, but because it stepped back, and the world filled the vacuum. For decades, the United States was the architect of global trade. It built the system, it enforced the rules, it set the standards. But over the last 10 years, the U.S. has retreated from that role. It withdrew from major trade agreements. It imposed tariffs on allies. It embraced economic nationalism. And while that may serve domestic political goals, it leaves space that Europe, China, India, and the global South are now rushing to fill. The EU-India deal is more than a trade agreement. It's a signal, a message, a turning point. It tells the world that Europe is done waiting for Washington. It tells the world that India is ready to step onto the global stage as a manufacturing and geopolitical powerhouse. It tells the world that the global South is no longer content to be a passive observer. And it tells the world that the next era of globalization will not be American-led. This is the quiet realignment of global power. Not through war, not through conflict, but through trade, through supply chains, through alliances, through the slow, steady construction of a new economic map. A map where the United States is still important, but no longer the center of gravity. And that brings us to the final question. What happens next? Europe will continue signing deals. India will continue rising. China will continue building its own parallel system. The global South will continue demanding a seat at the table. And the United States will have to decide whether it wants to rejoin the world it helped build or watch from the sidelines as a new order takes shape. The world is moving on, New alliances are forming, new powers are rising, new systems are emerging. And the question for America and for all of us is simple. Will the United States adapt to this new reality, or cling to an old one that no longer exists? The world is changing, whether anyone is ready or not. This is Trade Economics. See you in the next.